Alexander Coleman was a man anyone would envy. Tall, confident, wealthy, and deeply in love with his family. His name carried weight in business circles, and his empire stretched across the city, yet the only thing that truly mattered to him was his wife and children. No one could question his devotion. His employees whispered about how he would cancel million-dollar meetings just to attend his son's football match. His friends joked that he worshipped the ground his wife, Isabella, walked on. Even his enemies admitted Alexander Coleman was not just a rich man, he was a family man. In the grand Coleman mansion, laughter echoed through the halls every evening. Daniel, Samantha, and Noah, his 3 children, ran through the corridors, giggling and playing, their innocent joy filling the air. And at the heart of it all was Isabella, his queen, the woman he had promised to love forever. Yet, the world didn't know the full story. They didn't know how it all began. They didn't know the secrets Isabella carried. They didn't know that the perfect love story was built on a lie. And soon, that lie would destroy them all. Alexander met Isabella on a rainy evening at a charity gala. He had been a different man back then, cold, ruthless, too focused on success to care about anything else. Women threw themselves at him, seduced by his wealth, but he never looked twice. They all wanted the same thing: money, power, status. But Isabella, she was different. She wasn't the richest woman in the room, nor the most famous. Yet, something about her captivated him. Maybe it was the way her long black dress clung to her graceful figure. Maybe it was her voice, soft, yet confident. Or maybe it was the purity in her eyes, a purity he had never seen before. "You don't seem like the type who enjoys charity events," she said, tilting her head with a teasing smile. Alexander chuckled. "And what type do I seem like?" "The type who doesn't believe in miracles." He had scoffed at the time. Miracles. In business, success was earned, not given. Yet, months later, he realized she was his miracle. Alexander and Isabella's romance was a whirlwind. Within a year, he proposed at the most luxurious restaurant in the city. He spared no expense: a diamond ring, a private rooftop dinner, a live orchestra playing her favorite song. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, yes. Their wedding was the event of the year, attended by celebrities, billionaires, and government officials. But to Alexander, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was her. He adored her. He worshipped her. And when she told him she wanted to start a family, he was overjoyed. Months passed. Isabella didn't conceive. At first, Alexander remained patient. "It'll happen when the time is right," he told her. But Isabella was growing desperate. She fasted. She prayed. She visited Pastor Elijah, a powerful preacher known for his miracle prayers. Then, one night, she attended an all-night prayer session. Alexander had expected her to return home in the morning, exhausted but hopeful. Instead, she returned glowing. Weeks later, she announced her pregnancy. Alexander was ecstatic. He treated her like royalty: foot massages, prenatal yoga classes, expensive baby shopping sprees. "Everything I have is yours," he whispered as he kissed her swollen belly. When their son, Daniel, was born, Alexander cried for the first time in his life. "This is the happiest day of my life," he told Isabella. And for years, it truly was. After Daniel came Samantha. Then Noah. Alexander's heart grew fuller with each child. He slowed down at work, dedicating more time to his family. He read bedtime stories. He attended school events. He took them on vacations to Paris, Dubai, and the Maldives. He loved watching Isabella with the children, so patient, so gentle. She was the perfect mother. The perfect wife. Or so he thought. Over the years, Alexander noticed something strange about Isabella. She still prayed every night. She still fasted constantly. She still visited Pastor Elijah. "Why do you still pray for children when we already have 3? He once asked, chuckling. She forced a laugh. "Just prayers of thanksgiving." But deep down, he sensed something was wrong. One evening, Alexander met an old friend, Dr. Marcus Green, a well-respected doctor. As they chatted over drinks, Marcus mentioned something that sent a chill down Alexander's spine. "Did you know Isabella used to come to my clinic years ago?" Alexander frowned. "For what?" "She thought she was infertile." Alexander froze. "What do you mean?" "She gave birth to 3 children." Alexander Coleman had spent his entire life believing in love, trust, and family. Now, as he sat in his office staring at the DNA results that confirmed his worst fears, he realized everything he had built was a lie. Daniel, Samantha, Noah. None of them were his. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short gasps. He wanted to scream, to rip the papers apart, to erase the truth from existence. But the truth sat there, bold and undeniable, staring back at him. The children he had loved more than life itself were not his own. And Isabella, the woman he had devoted his life to, had been lying to him for years. The betrayal burned deep. But before the rage, before the storm of emotions that would consume him, he sat frozen in one painful memory after another. Memories that now made sense. Memories that, for years, he had ignored. Memories that had been screaming at him, telling him something was wrong. The suspicions had started small. So small that Alexander had brushed them aside. Daniel, their first child, had been allergic to nuts, shellfish, and pollen. The first time his face swelled up after eating peanut butter at 5 years old, Alexander had rushed him to the hospital, panicked and terrified. Dr. Marcus Green, his longtime friend and physician, had reassured him. "It's just allergies, Alex. Nothing to worry about." "But no one in my family has allergies," Alexander had insisted. Marcus had given him a patient smile. "Sometimes these things happen. It could come from Isabella's side." Alexander had turned to Isabella that night, his fingers gently brushing through her hair. "Does anyone in your family have allergies?" She had paused, just for a second, just long enough for him to notice. Then she had smiled and said, "My uncle had asthma. Maybe it's from him." He had believed her. After all, why would she lie? Then came Samantha, their second child. Unlike Daniel, she had no allergies. But by the time she was 4, she had asthma attacks so bad they left her gasping for breath in the middle of the night. Alexander had been the one to rush her to the hospital each time, holding her tiny, fragile body against his chest, begging God to let her live. "Why does she have asthma?" he had asked Marcus again, his voice laced with worry. "Hereditary factors," Marcus had said with the same calm tone. "If not from you, then from Isabella's family." Alexander had turned to Isabella again, this time with a deeper unease creeping into his soul. "Are you sure your uncle only had allergies? Could asthma run in your family too?" Again, she had paused. Again, she had lied. "I think my grandmother had breathing issues," she had murmured. "Maybe it skipped a generation." And again, Alexander had believed her. Then there was Noah. Noah, his younger son, was different from the others. He was left-handed. His eyes had a slight squint, a condition called strabismus. It wasn't a big deal. Children were born with all sorts of differences. But something felt off. One night, as Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, watching Noah sleep, a strange thought entered his mind. No one in my family is left-handed. Not his father. Not his mother. Not his grandparents. Not even Isabella's parents or siblings. So where had it come from? When he asked Isabella, she had laughed. Left-handedness can happen randomly, Alex. And the eyes, he had pressed. Again, she had laughed. You're being dramatic. His eyes are beautiful. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. The questions that had once been whispers in the back of his mind were now loud screams. But he still told himself, it's just genetics. Nothing is wrong. Nothing was wrong. Until the day everything shattered. It started on a Sunday evening. Noah had been playing in the garden when he suddenly collapsed. Alexander had been inside his home office when Isabella's scream pierced through the house. Alex. Alex, come quickly. He ran downstairs to find his younger son unconscious on the grass. His skin was pale. His lips were dry. His tiny chest barely moved. They rushed him to the hospital, where Dr. Marcus met them with grim news. He's severely anemic. He needs a blood transfusion immediately. Alexander had stepped forward without hesitation. Take my blood. Marcus nodded and ordered the test. Minutes later, he returned, looking troubled. Alex. What? Alexander asked impatiently. Marcus swallowed hard. You're not a match. Alexander froze. That wasn't possible. His own son. His own flesh and blood. Marcus turned to Isabella. We'll check the mother's blood next. A nurse drew Isabella's blood. 10 minutes later, Marcus returned with an even deeper frown. You're not a match either. Silence. A silence so thick that Alexander could hear his own heartbeat pounding like a war drum in his ears. Isabella's hands trembled as she whispered, that doesn't make sense. Marcus hesitated. It happens, sometimes. But it's rare. We'll find a donor. A donor was found. Noah received the blood. He survived. But Alexander's sleepless nights began. For days, Alexander couldn't eat. He couldn't think. The doubts that had haunted him for years now screamed inside his head. Daniel's allergies. Samantha's asthma. Noah's left-handedness. Noah's blood not matching either of them. What if they want mine? What if Isabella had been lying all along? One night, as he sat alone in the dark, his hands shaking, he picked up his phone and called Marcus. I need you to do something for me, he whispered. What is it? A secret DNA test. Marcus was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. Are you sure? Alexander clenched his fist. I need to know the truth. That night, he went into the children's rooms one by one. He took strands of their hair. He took toothbrushes. He took tiny pieces of their nails. Then he handed them over to Marcus. The results came in 3 days later. And when Alexander saw them, hell broke loose. Alexander sat in his car, parked just a few streets away from his home. The papers in his hand shook violently, his fingers tightening over them. The words on the DNA report blurred before his eyes, but he had read them enough times to know what they said. None of the children were his. Not his first son, Jason. Not his second son, Adrian. Not even his youngest, Liam. A hollow laughter bubbled in his chest, but when it escaped, it was nothing more than a broken whisper. His heart, his soul, everything he had ever believed in had just been ripped apart. His phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was Isabella. Isabella, his wife. The woman he had worshipped. The woman he had loved more than life itself. The woman who had given him 3 sons that he had raised with every fiber of his being, but they were never his. Alexander did not pick up the call. He couldn't. If he heard her voice, he might drive home and strangle her on the spot. Instead, he sat there, his breathing uneven, his thoughts spiraling into places they had never gone before. He thought of every sleepless night he had spent taking care of their sick children. He thought of every sacrifice he had made, every kiss he had placed on their little foreheads, every time he had called them my boys. They were never his boys. His stomach churned, and suddenly, he flung the DNA results to the other side of the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Why, Isabella," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Why did you do this to me?" A knock on his car window startled him. It was his best friend, Dr. Samuel, the only person who knew about the DNA test. Samuel's eyes were filled with pity, and Alexander hated it. He hated that he was being pitied like some weak, helpless fool. Samuel opened the door and got in. "Alex, you need to go home." Alexander let out a bitter chuckle. "Go home." He turned to face his friend, his eyes red and lifeless. "Go home to what, Sam?" "A wife who has been lying to me for years. Children who aren't mine." Samuel exhaled deeply. "You need to think, Alex. Don't do anything stupid." Alexander closed his eyes, breathing heavily. The only thing in his mind now was revenge. Days passed. Alexander stopped talking. He stopped laughing. He stopped eating. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing his own thoughts screaming in his head. "They aren't yours. They never were. She played you. She made you love them, knowing they were never yours." He started drinking. At first, just a little. A glass of whiskey at night. Then it became bottles. And then he would drink until he passed out. Isabella noticed. She started asking questions. "Alexander, what's wrong?" But he would just look at her. Look at her and wonder how a woman could be so wicked, so heartless, so evil. One night, she touched his arm in bed, and Alexander flinched as if she had burned him. Isabella frowned. "Talk to me. Ask yourself, Isabella." His voice was hollow. "Ask yourself what's wrong." She blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Alexander turned his head slowly, his dark eyes looking onto hers. "Who is their father?" A sharp silence filled the room. Isabella's breath hitched, but then she gave him that same innocent smile she always did. "What kind of question is that, Alex?" She even chuckled lightly, as if this was some silly joke. "Of course, you're their father." Alexander didn't blink. He reached under his pillow and pulled out the DNA results. He threw them onto her lap. The moment Isabella saw them, the color drained from her face. Alexander watched her. He was waiting for it. The fear. The guilt. The regret. But instead, Isabella smiled. She actually smiled. "So, you found out," she whispered. Alexander's chest rose and fell heavily. His fingers curled into a fist. "You have nothing to say?" She shrugged, still smiling. "What do you want me to say, Alex?" "That I'm sorry." She laughed softly. "You're not the first man to raise children that aren't his. I'm sorry for betraying your love and trust. Yes, I was really desperate and I thought you couldn't impregnate me. I thought you were impotent, so I did what I had to do to save face. I actually did it for our family, until I realized I was the cause. I had an infection. After I treated it, I didn't know it was me, so I did what I had to." "Who is their father?" Alexander asked, tears welled up in his eyes. "Actually, their fathers, they're from 3 different men, including my pastor." Isabella replied with a trembling voice, fidgeting. "You are evil. I can't believe you could do this to me. I loved you with every ounce of blood in me, with every viper in me. I thought it was for the best. I did it for us, and they are still your children," she said, drifting backwards. Something inside Alexander snapped. He hated her. At that moment, he hated her more than anything in the world. More than he had ever loved her. And he hated those boys. Those 3 little boys who had stolen his heart, his love, his years. His mind was made up. He had to get rid of them all. Alexander didn't act immediately. He was smart. He knew that if he acted too soon, he would get caught. So he pretended. He still kissed his children on the forehead before bed. He still laughed at Isabella's jokes. He still showed up for work. But every night, as he lay beside her in bed, he thought about how he would kill them. Poison. Too easy. Strangling. Too loud. Shooting them. No. He wanted them to suffer. And then, the perfect idea came to him. He would bury them alive. The thought made his heart pound with an almost twisted excitement. He would take them somewhere far, somewhere no one would hear their screams. He would watch them struggle, cry, beg for their lives. And then he would go home and finish Isabella. Alexander smiled to himself. Yes. That was the perfect way to end this nightmare. The day he decided to strike. One afternoon, Alexander sat in his office, waiting for the right moment. He looked at the clock. 1:45 p.m. He knew the boys would be in school. And he knew exactly where he was going. Slowly, he got up, grabbed his car keys, and walked out of his office. It was time. It was finally time. Alexander stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror that morning. His eyes were hollow, dark shadows underneath them. The man looking back at him was no longer the devoted husband and father. He had died the moment he learned the truth. Today, he would do what needed to be done. Today, he would cleanse his home. By evening, there would be no more betrayal, no more lies, no more pain. At exactly 2 p.m., Alexander drove to the children's school. The teachers were surprised. Mr. Alexander, we weren't expecting you today. Your wife always picks them up. He forced a smile. Yes, but I thought I should spend time with them today. Moments later, Jason, Adrian, and Liam came running toward him, their faces lighting up. Daddy. You came. He crouched down and opened his arms, hugging them tightly. His heart twisted painfully. This is the last time they will ever hug me. The last time I will hear them call me Daddy. He pulled back and forced another smile. We are going somewhere special today. Daddy, are you alright? You don't look fine and you are not usually like this. I love you, Daddy, Samantha said. He drove them to a nearby amusement park. He watched them play, running around, laughing loudly. But his mind was already in the dark room back home, where the ground was waiting for them. At some point, Jason, his eldest, ran to him and sat beside him. Daddy, why do you look sad? Alexander blinked. His throat felt tight. Do I? Jason nodded, his little face full of concern. You don't laugh anymore. For a moment, Alexander wanted to stop everything. He wanted to take them home, forget about the DNA results, and pretend everything was okay. But then he remembered Isabella's smile that night. That mocking, evil smile. His hatred came rushing back like fire. No. There was no going back. Tonight, it ends. When they got home, Alexander led them to a special room. The workers he had paid earlier had already dug the deep hole, covered by a thick rug. The children were tired from playing. This was perfect. He pulled out the juice bottles he had prepared earlier. Inside, a heavy overdose of sleeping pills. Here, drink up, my boys. They drank, trusting him completely. Minutes later, their little heads started drooping. One by one, they collapsed into deep sleep. Tears rolled down Alexander's face. His body trembled as he picked up Jason first, then Adrian, then little Liam. "Good night, my sons." He laid them carefully inside the grave, side by side. Then, with shaking hands, he picked up a shovel. And he began to cover them with dirt. The sound of sand hitting their small bodies made his stomach turn, but he did not stop. By the time the hole was filled, his heart was dead. Alexander cleaned up the room, making sure there was no sign of struggle. Then, he sat in the living room, drinking heavily, waiting. Isabella arrived late, looking confused. "Where are the kids?" she asked immediately. Alexander looked up at her slowly. His eyes were empty, soulless. "They are home." Isabella's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I went to the school, and they weren't there." "Where are they?" Her voice was shaking now, fear creeping in. Alexander stood up slowly and gestured for her to follow him. "Come with me. Let me show you where they are." The moment Isabella stepped into the room, she froze. The tiles looked different. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Alexander stood behind her, watching her closely. Her breathing became ragged. She could feel something was wrong. "Where are they?" Alexander pointed to the ground. "They are right there, Isabella. Beneath your feet." For a few seconds, she didn't understand. Then it hit her. Her knees buckled. "No. No, 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 Alex, please tell me you're joking." But the look in his eyes told her he was not. She let out an ear-piercing scream, throwing herself to the ground, clawing at the tiles. "My babies! My babies! Let them out! Alex, please! Please!" She turned to him, grabbing his shirt, shaking him violently. "You monster! You killed them! You killed our children!" Alexander's voice was ice cold. "They were never my children. Do you remember when I met you the first time? How I swore and promised to love, protect and care for you and our children? I fulfilled all those promises and even more, right? Tell me one thing I ever did to you, to deserve such punishment from you. I am very potent, you found out you were the cause, you couldn't talk to me so I helped you, you got treated of the infection. I wasn't even the problem, and you didn't just slept with one man, but 3 different men, Isabella." Alexander echoed, his voice raw tearfully. "I know I don't deserve your love anymore, but I'm begging you, please give me back my children. I will leave you, your house and won't take anything. Alex, please, I want my children back and alive. I know I don't deserve you and I know you don't deserve any of this. My children, our children doesn't deserve to die like this. Please punish me and leave my children out of this." Alexander's eyes turned red as he wiped his tears, his body was soaked with tears. He lifted up his head, and smirked while reflecting on every single moment. He loved the children dearly, thinking they were his. Recalling all the sweet and beautiful moments and years with Isabella, he smirked again, and that scared Isabella. "You deserve worse than death, you caused their death and you are to be blamed. Evil women like you shouldn't stay in this world, because you are contagious and can contaminate other good women. There was nothing I didn't do for you, my money is yours, everything that I owned is yours, and yet you could do such evil to me. You destroyed my life, and you made me the monster I've become now." Isabella couldn't stop crying, grasping her children's uniform in her grip. Tears welled up in Alexander's face, but his mind was made up. The monster in him rose and nothing could stop him. Isabella's face crumpled. "Alex, I'm sorry. Please, I will do anything. Just bring them back." Alexander simply tilted his head. "It's your turn now." Isabella barely had time to react before he grabbed her by the throat. She fought desperately, kicking, scratching his face, pulling his hair. But Alexander was too strong. He squeezed tighter. Isabella's eyes rolled back. Her lips turned blue. And finally, she went limp. He held her for a moment longer, making sure she was completely gone. Then, he let her body fall beside the grave of her children. Slowly, methodically, he buried her too. The house was silent. For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt peace. The next morning, Alexander went to work as if nothing had happened. Days passed. The neighbors noticed the silence. Weeks later, the police arrived. Someone had reported a foul smell from the house. They dug up the floor. What they found shocked the entire nation. Alexander was arrested immediately. He confessed without emotion, without remorse. The courtroom was silent when he was sentenced to life imprisonment. As he was led away in handcuffs, someone asked, "Do you regret it?" Alexander looked up and smiled. Regret. He let out a bitter laugh. She deserved worse. The world watched in horror as the news spread. The moral of the story was clear. Betrayal is a slow poison that destroys everything. Deception always has a price. And when love turns to hatred, there is no limit to what a broken heart can do. Thank you lovelies for watching. I hope you've learned a lot from this story. That betrayal can lead to disaster, it changes people and they never remain the same. Please drop your thoughts in the comment section, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and please click on the notification button to be the first to watch new stories as it drops. Every Monday, Wednesday and Friday and sometimes Sunday, please share and like. I love you besties. You are watching Merak African Folktales.